The richest man in the world lives in a $3 million home. His name is Andrew Carnegie, and if he were alive today, he would be worth over $400 billion. He built the world's largest steel company, US Steel, but later gave most of his money away. But why? Welcome to my channel. It all started in Scotland. Andrew Carnegie was born in 1835 in a small town called Dunfermline. His father was a hand weaver, which basically means he manually controlled a machine that wove cloth. The work was very low paying, so when Andrew was 12 years old, he went to work in a spinning mill, which basically took the raw materials and turned it into yarn. For the next 3 years, he worked 16-hour days for 18 shillings a week. It was terrible. Then, in 1848, Andrew's father died and his mother got really sick. So Andrew quit his job and started working as a bobbin boy. This meant he could earn more money at a textile factory by operating machines that made spools. But after a year, Andrew decided to move to the United States. When he arrived in America, he had only $10 in his pocket. Andrew got a job as a bobbin boy in a Pennsylvania textile factory, but quickly moved on to become a telegraph messenger. One day, while delivering messages, he met an important railroad executive named Thomas Scott. Since Andrew was good at his job and very ambitious, Thomas took him under his wing and taught him everything about the railroad business. At this time, America was building a ton of railroads across the country, because they were much faster than roads or waterways. There was just one problem. All of these railroads operated independently of each other. If someone wanted to travel from New York to Chicago, they might have to buy 3 or 4 different train tickets. Not only was this inconvenient, it also kept supply chains from working efficiently. Thomas and Andrew thought there should be a way to connect all of the railroads together and allow people to buy one ticket for multiple train rides. They came up with a plan. They would create a railroad that connected all of the others and then lease the track to the other railroads. The other companies would pay rent every mile they used the track. So all the different railroads were linked together. This system allowed travelers to buy one ticket for a cross-country trip, and it also allowed goods to be delivered much faster. This eventually led to the creation of the largest railway network in the world. As the railway expanded, Andrew realized he didn't want to spend the rest of his life working for other people. So he borrowed $500 from his friend Thomas and bought half of a small steel mill. At the time, steel was primarily used for making tools, horseshoes, and nails. However, Andrew wanted to mass-produce steel so he could use it to make railroad bridges and train cars. Unfortunately, the steel mill kept losing money, so Andrew asked Thomas for help. Thomas lent him $2,000, and Andrew was finally able to turn the business around. After 5 years, Andrew repaid back his loan with interest and bought out his partner for $10,000. Now he owned the largest steel mill in the world. To keep growing, Andrew built new steel mills all over the country. In total, he built 9 different steel mills. Then he opened a brokerage firm that bought and sold all of the steel from the mills. Finally, he created a railroad car manufacturing company that would use steel to replace wooden train cars. These 3 businesses grew extremely fast, but in 1873, the stock market crashed and steel prices plummeted. All of Andrew's hard work was quickly wiped away, and he lost nearly everything he had. But Andrew saw this as an opportunity to buy back his businesses at a cheaper price. He borrowed money from friends and family, bought back his businesses, and began expanding again. He kept buying out competitors until he owned the entire steel industry. That's right, he owned all of the steel produced in the United States, and it wasn't even close. His company produced 60% of all the steel in the nation. Andrew Carnegie Steel Company became the largest steel producer in the world. A few decades later, Andrew merged his company with two other steel giants to form US Steel. Today, US Steel is still the largest steel producer in the United States. But in Andrew's day, it was massive. In 1901, the company produced 6% of all the steel manufactured worldwide. To put this in perspective, Japan is the second largest steel producer in the world today, but they only produce 8% of the world's steel. The United States as a whole produces less than 5% of the world's steel. So back in Andrew's day, his company alone produced more steel than the entire countries of Japan, China, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom combined. US Steel also dominated the American economy. In 1901, US Steel represented 1% of America's total GDP. This was larger than the GDP of Portugal, Chile, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. On top of that, US Steel employed hundreds of thousands of Americans and paid them some of the highest wages in the country. Andrew believed that if his employees were well taken care of, they would be more productive and loyal. He also built housing, free medical clinics, libraries, parks, and golf courses near his factories, so his employees would enjoy life outside of work. Even though Andrew was incredibly successful, he knew his success wasn't without its problems. Many of the workers in his factories lived in poverty. He recognized that there needed to be some sort of balance between the wealth of the owner and the wealth of the worker. In 1906, Andrew brought in an accountant to figure out how much money he could give away and still maintain his lavish lifestyle. The accountant figured out that Andrew spent about $1.5 million a year on things like food, clothing, and entertainment. So he gave away anything above that amount. Andrew ended up giving away $350 million throughout his lifetime, which in today's money would be over $10 billion. He created the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace to help nations settle their differences without going to war. He also funded the construction of over 7,000 public libraries all around the world. In total, Andrew donated 90% of his wealth before he died. He passed away in 1919 from a heart attack. When his coffin was being carried into the funeral home, a steelworker who had been carrying it accidentally dropped it. Nobody knew what to do. The steelworker was about to be fired for dropping the coffin, but Andrew's son, who was standing off to the side, yelled, "Don't be afraid, it was an accident. It was just an accident." Then he walked over, picked up the coffin, and carried it the rest of the way inside. He understood that mistakes happen, and sometimes the best thing you can do is forgive and move on. Although Andrew did many good things with his money, he wasn't perfect. He was a notorious penny pincher. He was also cheap when it came to hiring more workers because he liked keeping his payroll low. This meant his workers often had to work 12-hour shifts with dangerous equipment. At one of his factories, a group of workers were using a crane to lift heavy steel beams. The crane operator was exhausted from working a double shift, so he fell asleep while operating the crane. The beams fell and crushed two workers to death. Their families were given $50 for each person and told to move on. That same year, Andrew gave away $10 million to build libraries and museums. So even though he was cheap when it came to his workers, he was incredibly generous to those in need. At the end of the day, Andrew Carnegie's story is one of the greatest rags to riches stories ever told. He was born dirt poor in Scotland, yet became one of the wealthiest men of all time. He built the world's largest steel empire and donated 90% of his wealth to various charities. You can learn more about Andrew through the additional resources. And as always, thanks for watching.